Overloads or overloading is a term you're going to hear and see in documentation. And I want to demonstrate it to you in this video and talk about overloaded methods. Now here we're really starting to build on some of the really cool functionalities you can take advantage of in C#. Now methods in C# can have the same name as long as they have different signatures, kind of like people. There can be two Marks in the room, but we will have two very different signatures, and that's not just what we write with our hand. It has to do with our properties and so forth. It's what makes us two unique human beings. Now, method signatures, just kind of stick this in the back of your brain. If you've worked with delegates, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, just skip this, but I just want to bring to your attention method signatures are treated differently when you're dealing with method overloads and when you're dealing with delegates. And we'll get to that when we talk about delegates later. So what is a method's signature? Well, it is the method name and the parameters. We're talking about the number of parameters, the data types of the parameters, and so forth. We can execute two totally separate sections of code just based on really the method name and parameters. The best way to understand this is to see it out there in code. So let's open our friend Visual Studio 2012. And if you look in your work files folder, you will see a project called Overloaded Methods. And you can look at the code or you can just follow along. So we will let this open up and then we will start to write some code. Now the first thing that I want to do here is I'm going to do my standard old drop the button. I like really simple examples. I don't like to build applications in courses because a lot of people do applications a lot of different ways and it doesn't make sense and so forth. One of the best training classes I ever went to when I was learning programming was one where very, very simple examples were used, and then you can figure out how to implement different functionalities as you need it in your own coding. So what I want to do first here, there's my button click, and I'm going to add my calls there in just a moment. But let's go out here and create something. I'm going to do public void do this. Now this is going to be a method that doesn't take any parameters, okay? I want to show you something here. Since I'm in the Windows Forms, I've got the using statement right here, using systemwindows.forms, which means I don't have to write all of that other stuff. I can now, if you'll notice, grab message box just by typing it. It has to do with how the .NET framework works. We won't get into that right now. And so I'm just going to say, do this was called. Okay? Now, I can call that very easily, but before I do, I want to do something else. We're going to come down here and do another public void do this. And you're thinking, wait a minute, you've already got a do this method. You can't do that. No pun intended. And notice, yes, I can. Okay, I'm going to copy my message box down here, and I'm going to say do this was sent an argument of, and we'll concatenate the argument that was sent in. Notice here's the argument, and we're going to put it right there. Okay, now we're going to do another one. Public void do this, and this time we're going to send in a string A. And we're going to do our message box again. Let's see if it's still there. It is. And do this was sent this word. And we'll assume that we're going to send in a word, put a space, I'll concatenate, and then notice my same variable or my same parameter, my same argument is going to be used in both places. So how does C# figure out which one of these to call? Well, it's going to call the one based on the signature. Now, what is the signature? This signature is do this with no parameters. This is do this with one parameter of an integer, and this one is do this with one parameter of a string. Now, I could do another overload that's a do this with two integers, a do this with two integers and a string, and so forth. And so that's what's making up the signature. Now, notice what we can do here. I can call do this with nothing. All right, and it will call this one right here. So let's execute that. And we will see that happen. So I click the button, and do this was called. Okay, so we can go back and look at our code, and we can see that when I ran this, it executed this one. All right, what if I go back here and just pass an integer in? Okay, this time it's going to run this one, and we'll see do this was sent an argument of, and it will show it to us. So we'll execute here again. Notice this time it called the different one. Now let's do one more thing. Let's pass it a string, and I'll pass it a very nice name there, and I'll execute this, and it's going to call the bottom one that's looking for a string. So this was sent the word mark. So you can see how the various ways that you call this are the ways that it's going to execute and the way it's going to choose these based on the signature. And this process is called overloading this method. Okay, and you will see overloads in some interesting ways when you're working with classes, and I'll point those out to you a little bit later on when we come to that. So anyway, real quick look at overloading methods.